What has Massachusetts given us? A liberal governor who wanted us to believe he is strong on defense. A liberal senator who wanted us to believe he was a man of the people. And a Massachusetts moderate who runs away from Ronald Reagan.
Look, I was an independent during the time of Reagan-Bush. I'm not trying to return to Reagan-Bush.
Romney donated to Democrats, and given the choice to vote in the Democrat or Republican primary, Romney chose the Democrats, voting for a liberal Democrat instead of President George H.W. Bush. Romney opposed the contract with America, raised taxes, and authored government-mandated health care with taxpayer-funded abortions. But now he tells us, trust me, I'm a conservative. Massachusetts moderate Mitt Romney, he'll say anything to win. Anything. And just like John Kerry,
laissez les bon temps rouler.
He speaks French, too.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Mitt Romney.
But he's still a Massachusetts moderate, and a Massachusetts moderate cannot beat Barack Obama.
I love that so much. My name is Ben Burgis. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined, as always, by super producer Jake Appett and our very talented graphic designer, J. Andrew World. Also, this time by Matthew Vernon Whalen, no stranger to GTA viewers. And we're going to get into why he's here in a moment. But that little trip down memory lane we just watched, that was a Newt Gingrich campaign attack ad on Mitt Romney from the 2012 election that ended the litany of complaints with the really unpardonable thing that Mitt Romney spoke French. It's like, look, you can get past the rest of this. Yeah. Have I told you yet that the man speaks a second language?
Yeah, and it's French. Yeah.
Yeah. Come on.
Well,
best part about
what would be the? Oh, sorry. What were you? What would be the most okay second language to speak? Is what I'm wondering. Because almost anything to a conservative, I think, would be kind of a red flag.
Yeah, it's like Spanish, better or worse.
I think because he actually he tried to pull himself off as Spanish because he was father lived in Mexico, was born in Mexico, I think it was. If I remember correctly, he was an American citizen born in Mexico.
Mitt Romney was, yeah. No, I mean, I'm sure Romney also speaks some Spanish, but from the Gingrich perspective, would that have been I don't think that would have been as big a known because because speaking French, that's kind of gay, right? I mean, that's
implication. That's the implication is that's why he speaks.
Yeah, I think Spanish with a super gringo accent would be the most acceptable second language. But you're clearly just using it to people that you employ, so you could talk to them. You know what I mean?
Excuse me, habla español.
Yeah, that would be the most acceptable.
Maybe British.
yeah, exactly.
With an American accent.
British with an American accent.
Yeah. Are we counting British as a second language? I'm so confused right now.
It might be a little too Catholic. Someone said Latin, but
yeah, I don't know. Do you understand what the fuck they're saying, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually right now. I am back in Mexico for a couple months. And so I don't have any in-person classes lined up to the fall, so I'm just saving a little rent money, logging in some time by the ocean. But just to reassure anybody, every time I go into an establishment in town and trot out my Spanish, my accent would not lose me any American Patriot points. But yeah, reason we were doing that little trip down memory lane is because later on the episode, we have Lee and Freddy G of the Vanquished podcast are going to be joining us. That is a newish podcast that they're doing where they take a look every episode at somebody who lost a presidential election. And so we thought we'd come on, have them come on and go over. I do not remember Romney campaigning in Mississippi and talking about grits and saying y'all, but that's amazing. So thought we'd talk about some of the best, worst, funniest presidential losers in history. We've got Ross Perot, we've got Mitt Romney, we've got the Prohibition Party. So should be a very fun discussion with Anders and Freddy coming up in just a little while. I've also got returning champ Ryan Zickgraf joining us for the post game for patrons. But right now, there are a couple of things we need to get to before we get to the main event for tonight. One of them is that something I do periodically for Jacobin is I write articles pointing out that Rashida Tlaib was right about something. So years ago, for example, I wrote one called Rashida Tlaib is right. The attempt to extradite Julian Assange is a huge threat to press freedom. We will definitely be back on that subject at the end of the episode. But most recently, I wrote an article called Rashida Tlaib is right. The Supreme Court is corrupt. And that, in between, I actually did an article defending her from the river to the sea. But that doesn't have Rashida Tlaib is right in the headline. So we left it out. But she is actually quite frequently right about many different subjects. And we do have a clip of her being right about the Supreme Court.
Mr. Speaker, the Supreme Court is not facing an ethics crisis. It's a corruption crisis. But it seems like that every single day there's new headlines about more corruption coming out of our U.S. Supreme Court. I know we need urgent action to hold these unhinged, corrupt extremists accountable. It is extremely disturbing that the United States Supreme Court, the highest court of our land, is the only court that does not have enforceable code of conduct. Justice Thomas, which my residents call corruption clearance, has received over $4 million in 193 gifts, including multiple vacations, flights on private jets, helicopter rides, Mr. Speaker, and yacht trips from Republican billionaire mega donors like Harlan Crow, who actually have cases before the court. And we are supposed to expect this court to hold itself accountable? Give me a break. One of these luxury trips actually cost $500,000. And it's not just corrupt clearance, it's Justice Alito, who has also been hit with numerous scandals recently, including accepting luxury trips and flying insurrectionists stop the steal flags outside of his home after the attack on our U.S. Capitol. And yet, here we go, the American people are supposed to trust him to decide the cases around January 6th. And these unelected justices are serving lifetime appointments, Mr. Speaker, continue, and again, to strip us of our rights, shred our voting rights, got our environmental protections, our right to breathe clean air and drink clean water, and sell our democracy to the highest bidder. It's time to expand the Supreme Court. It's time for reforms. I know our residents in the 12th Congressional District are demanding that I move with urgency on this issue. We need to enact term limits to Supreme Court justices, enforce binding code of conduct, real reforms, and expedite impeachment proceedings. These reforms are long overdue. I know Justice Thomas should have never been confirmed in the first place. We should have listened to Anita Hill. But let me be clear, Thomas and Alito need to be impeached and removed from the bench now. Our country deserves a Supreme Court that's acting in the best interest of the American people, not a court that is accepting bribes and doing the bidding of right-wing extremists.
Yeah. So there was quite a bit of pushback and criticism for that's just speaking disrespectfully of the 9 philosopher kings that we give the lifetime ability to overturn our laws. And there's also, I also saw a fair number of people who sort of tried to do the thing that you say to sound sort of, world weary and clued in, where you're like, oh, come on, it's not bribery. They'd make these decisions anyway. It's like, okay, but to the extent that that's true, that doesn't make it better, right? Like if it's just that, Clarence Thomas is always going to side with billionaires because of his ideological zeal and love for the billionaire class. That and this is just all of the yacht trips around the world and all that stuff from Harlan Crow are just a way of saying, thank you for being you. That doesn't actually make me feel better about the whole thing.
We still don't know about Brett Kavanaugh's who paid off his gambling debts.
Yeah, also seems relevant, right? I mean, again, if you're going to give 9 people a level of authority to overturn democratic laws that is with very few analogies in other advanced democracies, right? I mean, most high courts don't have anything like this much power. It seems totally crazy that there's so little enforcement for this stuff. There isn't a binding code of ethics. And, I think certainly the sort of sum total of reforms that she's talking about there, expanding the court, term limits, making impeachment easier would definitely reduce the overall power of the institution, which, I certainly think would be a good thing. So that was one of the 2 Jackman articles that I wrote since the last episode that we've done. The other one was about Israel-Palestine. It's called Israel Killed Hundreds of Civilians to Save 4 of Its Own. And it makes a sort of very basic point about this much vaunted rescue operation where there were literally hundreds of Palestinian deaths. And they bombed a crowded market, during the middle of the day, in order to save 4 people. And of course, it's particularly obscene because at any time since like October 9th, there could have cut a deal to free all of the hostages, right, in exchange for a permanent ceasefire. But I mean, the real thing this brings out to me is just how blatantly so much of American media and political discourse, just doesn't treat human life as being as significant when it's Palestinian as when it's American or Israeli. Which brings us to the main topic we want to talk about for this opening segment, and the reason that invited Matthew here on to talk about it, because he's been a frequent guest for this kind of thing, which is my upcoming grim date with Destiny. Tomorrow,
Stephen Cannoli.
No comment. Tomorrow night, Tomorrow night, I am doing a debate on Israel-Palestine with the YouTube streamer whose name our friend Norm had so much trouble with, famously, but who certainly goes by the nom de internet Destiny, and this is the sort of basic point I want to make in that debate, right? Because it seems to me that all too often debates about this topic sort of devolve into competitive trivia citation contests, and the sort of main point ends up getting lost. And to me, the main point is this exact point about just sort of basic moral egalitarianism, that everybody counts for exactly as much as everybody else. And from what I've seen, which is not everything, right? The man does very long debates, and I have watched like a fraction of the stuff, right? But from what I've seen, is the thing that I find most troubling about a lot of what he has to to say about this. So we have a couple of clips from a couple of these past debates that I wanted to take a look at. Let's roll up the first one.
The justice question is incredibly hazy in the Palestinian territories.
So the death.
Well, I don't think certain aspects of the justice question are not hazy, right?
Well, the question, for instance, of Palestinian refugees is a very weird, the unique treatment that they have compared to anybody else. There is no apartheid. There is no apartheid.
Well, hang on. I've seen you say conflicting things on this, because I've seen you say, okay, yeah, there's apartheid, but really what we're really just talking about is a military occupation. And then I've seen you say there is no apartheid.
Yeah, so I think initially what I would have said was, I'm willing to give up on maybe there's apartheid in the West Bank, but like the solution needs to be the ending of the occupation to solve that problem. Right. But if we're talking about apartheid and the war crime of apartheid, and specifically apartheid, we're talking about top-down systems of racial discrimination and racial dominance. But if we look at the issues between Palestine and Israel, it's usually an issue of citizenship or not. It's not a racial domination question.
But how do they grant citizenship? I mean, Jews can move to Israel, but if you were Edward Said, he couldn't move to Israel. So how's
there are more Arabs living in Israel than there are Jews living in every other Arab country around the world combined. So the idea that you have to be Jewish to have rights in Israel when there are 2 million Arab Israelis.
Hang on. It's not that you have to be Jewish to have rights in Israel. It's that if you're Jewish, you have a greater right. You have the right to move to Israel.
No. Hold on. Israel has a right to control its immigration policy however they want. If a country wants to say you can only let in white people or whatever, that's fine.
That's correct.
The issue would be is, do they treat their citizens differently? But they don't. Arab Israelis enjoy all the same legal rights than non-Arab Israelis.
I literally had this conversation with a Zionist this morning, and they blocked me because I called his question obtuse. He didn't appreciate name calling, so
yeah, no, that was actually my fault. I'll tell you guys later. But in any case, so there's a lot going on in that clip. Matthew, you want to get us started with some initial thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I should tell the audience, I've warned Ben that before this that Destiny talks so fast that I find it very distracting. And every time I'm trying to unpack one thing he says, he's on to 10 others. And now I find myself distracted by the rifle in the background looming.
Yeah, the rifle is a really interesting choice.
I feel like that I'm not very familiar with his work. I've seen maybe 3 or 4 things that he's debated in, but
I mean, that just seems like such a okay, that's just not a design choice I would make. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, there's a lot going on in that clip, and some of it goes by very quickly, as you say, and there's a lot that needs to be untangled there. But I just want to maybe start by top line, what's the issue here, right? That, Nathan, the first thing Nathan says in the clip, basically, right, is, well, some of the justice issues seem very clear here, because, there's, Israel has committed the crime of apartheid, right, against the Palestinian population, the West Bank and Gaza, which I think is completely correct. And then Steven responds by saying a couple of things, which are sort of, it's not totally clear to me how they're all supposed to fit together.
One is that he says that he used to believe, I think if I've heard him fully enough, that ending the occupation would have ended the apartheid that he used to agree existed. So that part's a little confusing to me.
He sort of presented it as
there now that he doesn't hold that position anymore.
It was almost like he was gonna make a deal rhetorically. Right. It's like, okay, I'll give you apartheid just for the West Bank, but then you have to give me
then he concedes it's in the West Bank, which is interesting. It's interesting that he doesn't concede that Palestinians don't have equal rights within Israel. Because what stake does that have for the arguments?
What he's doing, it's a bait and switch. He's saying that Arab citizens which is what he's referring to, and this is what which is not the people in the West Bank. It's a whole other class of people, which the Zionist that blocked me this morning sent me this report and said very specifically in there, Arab citizens, not to be confused with people of the Palestinians who aren't citizens.
Sure. Yeah, but just in this segment, his only concession was that there might be apartheid in the West Bank.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So he's doing like a combination of a few moves here that I think are all very wrong, but they're going by so quickly that it's easy to not really take the time to disentangle each one of them. Now, granted, Nathan brings up the law of return in a way that I think, might have been a tactical mistake in the moment, right? Because I do think that there's something very objectionable there, but it doesn't maybe directly speak to the point, right? So, in other words, the thing that's objectionable about it is, the sort of like if all it was to it was that Israel had the law of return, then that would be no more objectionable than lots of Ireland has like a law that makes it very easy for people of Irish descent, who are fresh from Brooklyn or whatever to get Irish citizenship, right? Lots of, I guess I should make it Boston, to keep with the stereotypes, but and so I don't love those laws in any country because I think that they let people go to the front of the line who don't necessarily need to, right? Just because of these sort of incidental facts about them. But if that were all there was to it, I don't think it would necessarily be that big a deal. I think the thing that's like really grating about the law of return is, as Nathan said, the combination with like Edward Said, couldn't have gone back. He was literally born there. Or Rashida Tlaib, right? Her parents are from Palestine, and is famously hasn't even been allowed to visit. That's like the combination of the two things is like really what feels like insult to injury. But also, and so I think it is a little bit off the sort of main point about apartheid. But then also Steven said something completely insane that sort of got lost in the middle of that, which is, they have a right to decide their immigration policies if countries decided that only white people could come.
That's the next thing I was going to bring up, which is like any country has the right to decide whichever kind of person. And like, I was going to say this too about Nathan earlier, like, sure, he missed that for sure, and he definitely I feel like he did an all right job of like introducing certain things, but he's just trying to
No, I think he did a good job overall in the debate.
He's doing exactly what I would have done in this situation, which is just be like, wait, what about this? And then it's just like, and get as many wait, what about this as you can in.
Yeah, I think it's like, if you just mean right in the sense that it doesn't violate international law, that's probably true. But also,
a country could make a policy where no white people are allowed to come in.
Yeah, I heard it as the other way around, but either way, it doesn't matter.
Equally, crazy.
Yeah, I think like if the United States adopted the only white people immigration policy, I think that'd be very bad, right? I think we would all agree that was very bad and very objectionable, right? And so it's weird to bring it up as an example in that context. But also, this is like all slightly beside the point, right? Like this is like what people are talking about when they talk about apartheid. And this is to Andy's point a minute ago, right? About the Israeli Arab West Bank Palestinian distinction, which, you know, I mean, obviously it's the same people. It's just like which side of the line you ended up on after the war in 1948. Yeah, it's true that, you know, so-called Israeli Arabs, right, Palestinian families who ended up on the Israeli side of the line after the initial war in 1948 were eventually granted mostly equal rights in Israel, certainly Israeli citizenship. That history is a little bit more complicated than people let on. They were actually collectively, like the entire group was under martial law for like the first 19 years of Israel's existence, but that was lifted, you know, in 1966. And I guess that's 18 years, sorry. But yeah, that's true. And there is a lot that you could actually say about discrimination against the Israeli Arab population. Certainly in terms of things like housing and land use, there's a lot of discrimination that would not be legal, for example, against minority groups in the United States. It would violate the Civil Rights Act that's perfectly legal in Israel. Restrictive housing covenants. There's something called the Jewish National Fund, which controls actually a really substantial amount of the land in the country, that is quite open about having discriminatory policies about who can lease land, which makes me feel slightly ill, because there's like a bagel place I used to really love in my hometown that had a little JNF box to, you know, put a coin in. And, you know, I can remember just thinking nothing of it, putting my tip in there. But in any case, and also the political participation of Israeli Arabs has actually been really limited. There is a document that's put out by the Israeli human rights group, B'Tselem, called Not a Vibrant Democracy. This is Apartheid. We can stick a link in the show notes where they make the point that one of the points they make is that Israel has an electoral commission that basically decides if you're allowed to participate in elections, that has a history. And there have been all kinds of, like, you know, it's a complicated history. Sometimes the Supreme Court has said, no, you're going too far. You have to let these people participate. But one of the things they do is they say, yeah, if you're too anti-Zionist, you're not allowed to participate in elections, right? You know, that you're questioning the basic foundations of the state. And there actually have been lots of Israeli Arab parties and politicians who've been disqualified on that count. So you put that together with the housing and land use discrimination, with the ban. This is true on, you know, if you are, you know, again, one of these Palestinian families that ended up on the Israeli side of the line, and you get married to a Palestinian on the other side of the line, you're not allowed to live together as a married couple in Israel, allegedly for security reasons. I think pretty obviously for demographic ones. So there is actually quite a bit you can say about discrimination against Israeli Arabs, but also, look, pretend that wasn't true, right? Pretend that Israeli Arabs had completely equal rights in every way to Israeli Jews, right? Completely fucking irrelevant. This is, you know, this is like, yeah, the thing that makes it apartheid, when people are talking about apartheid, they're not thinking of the Israeli Arabs, they're thinking of the West Bank. And the point here, it's not true that every single Arab has been denied citizenship rights in Israel because of their ethnicity, but it doesn't follow that no Arabs are denied citizenship rights in Israel because of their ethnicity, right? For Israel has stayed in the West Bank for 57 years. It's the current official position of the Israeli government, right? Netanyahu says this all the time, that there will never under any circumstances be a Palestinian state. Israel's been building cities full of its own citizens in the West Bank for 57 years. If you are one of those settlers in the West Bank, you're considered for every legal purpose to live in Israel, not to live abroad. Yet the Palestinians who live there don't have citizenship rights. Why not? Well, because when you combine them with the Israeli Arabs, there would be too many Arab citizens of Israel. It would undermine its character as a Jewish state. This is not my paranoia here. This is something that Israeli politicians will say in so many words all the time.
And it's true. They only occupy. There's only like 5% of non.
About 5% of Israeli Jews. A little, actually, it's more than 5% at this point, but yeah, about 5% of Israeli Jews, between 5 and 10%, depending on which numbers you believe, live in West Bank settlements. So yeah, and of course, those people, again, they're treated as living in Israel, not living abroad. They could, I mean, I always think of like if my dad maybe lost his mind and decided that he was going to exercise his right under the right of return. I'm not sure if I could myself. I might have to do some sort of chain migration scenario. But in any case, if he did, right, he could move straight to the West Bank, as his initial destination, right, and be considered to have done the thing, to have moved, to Israel. And he'd be able to vote in Israeli elections. If he were accused of a crime, he'd be tried in a real civilian court, not a military court, right? And of course, his Palestinian neighbors would lack all of these rights, right? So, that is what people are talking about when they talk about apartheid. And it seems to me that the shoe fits. I know we're running out of time. We need to get Anders and Freddy on, but let's do at least the first. Let's see if we have time for the second, but let's do at least the first of the clips from the other debate.
It sounds cold to say it, but war is tragic and civilians die. There is no war that this has not happened in the history of all of humankind. The statement that Israel might take care not to target civilians is not incompatible with a diary entry from someone who said they saw civilians getting killed. I think that sometimes we do a lot of weird games when we talk about international humanitarian law or laws that govern conflict, where we say things like civilians dying is a war crime, or civilian homes or hospitals getting destroyed is necessarily a war crime, or is necessarily somebody intentionally targeting civilians without making distinctions between military targets or civilian ones. I think that when we analyze different attacks, or when we talk about the conduct of the military, I think it's important to understand, prospectively from the unit of analysis of the actual military committing the acts, what's happening and what are the decisions being made, rather than just saying retrospectively, oh, well, a lot of civilians died, not very many, military people died, comparatively speaking, so it must have been war crimes, especially when you've got another side, I'll fast forward to Hamas, that intentionally attempts to induce those same civilian numbers, because Hamas is guilty of any war crime that you would potentially accuse, and this is according to Amnesty International, people that Norm loves to cite. Hamas is guilty of all of these same war crimes, of them failing to take care of the civilian population, of them essentially utilizing human shields to try to fire rockets free from attack. Essentially, yes. I'm just saying that essentially, as in terms of how international law defines it, not how Amnesty International defines it, but Amnesty International describes times of human shielding, but they don't actually apply the correct international legal standard.
Know what's the correct
I know, absolutely.
Law. You
no,
haven't
but,
the
Norm, I absolutely
you
do,
haven't
Norm.
the clue.
I absolutely
I
do.
think,
but I'm just saying, believe it or not, Norm, the entire Geneva Convention is all on Wikipedia. It's a wonderful website. But I'm just saying that on the Hamas side, if there's an attempt to induce this type of military activity, attempt to induce civilian harm, that it's not just enough to say, like, well, here's a diary entry where a guy talks about how tragic
I think the problem with your statement is that if you go back and listen to it, the first part of it is war is hell, civilians die. It's a fact of life, and you state that in a very factual manner. Then when you start talking about Hamas, all of a sudden you've discovered morality.
I just love Norm just shouting out, "You can't find that on Wikipedia." I think I'm going to start using that.
So, also, like, there are lots of myths about how Israel doesn't target civilians, or even just confusion cast about whether they target civilians, and they often just make the argument themselves. They'll point to their high precision technology and intelligence information about, they know exactly who they're targeting, and then it's like, okay, so then you knew that you were targeting a bunch of civilians if you had all this intelligence. And
it's also like I think where this really becomes most obviously absurd is with the displacement that you make all the like war is hell rhetorical moves you want, but like you don't displace 85% of the population from their homes by mistake.
I totally agree with that, but I think we both agree that's not what Destiny's thinking about. He's thinking about the surface level of of casualties, basically. And so to argue that there's all these different reasons why. I mean, first of all, let's just look at in Operation Cast Lead, which was the smallest of the mowings of the lawn since the early 2000s. Or no, I mean, until now. So it was the biggest at the time, but smallest now, except for Pillar of Defense, where it was scandalous how many people were killed, how many civilians were killed. There were Human Rights Watch humanitarian organizations all around the world that documented on it and investigated it. And you had, I think, 1,000 civilians and 350 children and 6,000 homes destroyed. And then in Operation Protective Edge, it was 550 children and around 2,000, I think, civilians killed and 18,000 homes destroyed. And in those instances, there are many not even humanitarian organizations. Even within Israel, there's an organization called Breaking the Silence that does basically transcripts of interviews with Israeli soldiers who participated in each of these things. And we're just talking about Cast Lead and Protective Edge now, which are fractional, marginal compared to what's happening now, and were scandalous then. After Protective Edge, the head of the Red Cross, and a lot of this I'm getting from Finkelstein's last book on Gaza, not his last book, his most
his book on Gaza is
last book, and the head of the Red Cross, whose job it is to visit disaster zones and humanitarian crises and war zones, said it was the worst destruction he'd ever seen in his life. And now the amount of homes destroyed is, I can't remember the exact number, but obviously tens and tens of thousands more of that. That gets to your point about displacement. But in those Breaking the Silence interviews, most Israeli soldiers that were interviewed, they claim the same things. And these are not ideological people. They're not ideological towards us. They're ideological extremists in the opposite direction in many cases. Talking about insane amounts of destruction. You couldn't see anything. We destroyed everything. It was crazy. Words like crazy and insane keep coming up. And then notably, in many of these accounts, multiple of them describe how in all of these expeditions of insane destruction, they never saw a militant. They never saw a Hamas fighter, never once. And so they're just pulverizing civilian areas. There's not even a pretense in many cases that they have encountered militants. Yeah. And even now, I read the mainstream coverage about this, and I see the word there were heavy exchanges between Hamas in this particular mission that the DF is on, and they're battling in the streets. Who are they battling with?
Yeah. I also see
the other day there was an article.
Jempt is correct. It says Destiny is wrong. Human shielding requires specific intent, meaning the act of placing military objectives near civilians has to be done specific intent to prevent attack. In fact, I think the sort of standard legal definition of the crime of human shielding is directing the movements of civilians to protect military operations, right? So the sort of thing that in fact, that the IDF used to do pretty openly until the high court there told them they had to stop, and now it still does sometimes happen, where for example, they'll force Palestinian civilians to walk in front of them, so they won't get shot at, and it continues placing military objectives near civilians is not human shielding. It's an entirely separate war crime of not taking precautions in attack to prevent civilian death. It's not a sexy term, though. That's all totally correct. But the other thing I did just want to point out about this clip is that Destiny is going from his war is hell, things happen, civilians die, right, defense of Israel, to jumping very quickly to this whataboutism about Hamas. Now, in this particular case, I mean, again, the human shielding claim, I take Amnesty International more seriously than I take Destiny on this, but also it doesn't matter, right? Like, because you have like his larger point, right? It's like, oh, any war crime, you could accuse Israel of, you can accuse Hamas of. It's like, okay, let's just pretend for the sake of argument that's true. All right, why do I care? I'm an American citizen. My country is not sending 2,000-pound bombs to Hamas to kill Israeli civilians and children, right? If they were, I'd be against that, but they're not, right? So I don't know why, like, war crimes that are committed by Hamas are supposed to be relevant here any more than if we were discussing, if this were a debate where like there was like a Serbian guy who was there who was defending Serbia's war crimes in Bosnia in the 90s. And, and his American co-debater was like, oh, well, Croatia also committed a lot of war crimes. It's like, okay, right? Like, however much or little truth there is to it has absolutely goddamn nothing to do with anything.
Yeah. And I just wanted to say two more things before I could.
Yeah, please.
You probably go soon, but just to finish that thought too, like, about the battles and or whatever, the fighting or whatever, however it's reported. Like just the other day, there was a story about how, I don't remember exactly what it was, but in some mission or whatever, Israel had suffered several military combatants.
Yeah.
Lost several soldiers. And that was like breaking news in the way that sometimes breaking news about Palestinian deaths is, civilian deaths.
Yeah.
It was like a big deal that they lost 7 or 8 soldiers or something. And I think that speaks to the fact that they're not battling anyone. It's just a massacre. And then the second thing I wanted to point out, even though I agree that with you, Ben, that it's sort of a side note and it in some ways even distracts to focus a little bit on, but he says Destiny says at one point, he says when Finkelstein kind of like objects a little bit, he goes, I'm going with this definition, not the Amnesty International one.
Yeah.
You know why he said that?
Because
Amnesty International accused Israel of human shielding. That's why he said that. Not in this, at least as a most recent documents that I'm aware of are not from this exchange, but even from previous ones. That's why he said that. I believe the human rights reports accusing Israel of human shielding came from Amnesty. And that's why he immediately, as soon as Norm starts to push back, he says, I'm not talking about Amnesty's definition, because he either knows Amnesty has said that or he knows Norm quoted Amnesty saying that or something. He's very quick to dismiss Amnesty kind of suddenly, even though Amnesty is not like a radical left organization.
No, not whatsoever. Well, speaking of
source,
speaking of not having to be a radical leftist to see this stuff. One last one before we end this segment, just because I like it so much. From that same debate, this is just Norm doing something I really liked, because I think that we were talking about like Nathan earlier, and sort of was good and bad about how he approached that. I think that with Norm, right? I think that where he sometimes goes wrong in debates is that he's such a fanatically thorough researcher, right? That it's like he he's like incensed when anybody gets anything wrong, and like he really wants to like pounce on it and talk about it. And sometimes you have to pick your battles. And it's not good to sort of get lost in the weeds of things that aren't actually essential to the main point. But this is just a general clip of Norm actually not doing that, actually sort of pulling out to do the view from 10,000 feet. And I think he does it really nicely.
Most theorists of nationalism say there are two kinds of nationalism. One is a nationalism based on citizenship. You become a citizen, you're integral to the country. That's sometimes called political nationalism. And then there's another kind of nationalism, and that says the state should not belong to its citizens. It should belong to an ethnic group. Each ethnic group should have its own state. It's usually called the German Romantic idea of nationalism. Zionism is squarely in the German Romantic idea. That was the whole point of Zionism. We don't want to be Bundists and be one more ethnic minority in Russia. We don't want to become citizens and just become a Jewish people in England or France. We want our own state.
Like the Arab 23 states.
No, wait. Before we get to the Arabs, let's stick to the Jews for a moment, or the Zionists. We want our own state. And in that concept of wanting your own state, the minority at best lives on sufferance and at worst gets expelled. That's the logic of the German Romantic Zionist idea of a state.
Yeah, and to me, that's the sort of core point, right? Like, I mean, if the rest of it's the trees, right? I mean, this is the forest. That because I don't think that to sort of see what's wrong with that, I don't think you need some special radical socialist principles. I think just sort of basic 101 level liberal democratic principles are enough to get it done. And so that's the case that I want to make tomorrow night when I have my own date with Destiny. So you can watch that live tomorrow night at 8 Eastern on Modern Day Debate, and we'll probably get the video here like a day or two after that and show it here. Thank you so much, Matthew, as always. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And I will see you guys at the end of the show. You're going to come back to do a quick news thing, but right now, let's bring on Anders Lee and Freddy G to talk about presidential losers. How you guys doing?
Hey, Anders Lee here. Thanks for having us on, Ben.
Freddy G here. Yeah, so happy to be here. Glad you already showed the Dukakis in the tank, but I have it behind me just in case.
Well, we do also have a graphic of Dukakis in the tank.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, let's see if we can. Yep, there it is.
Boom.
Yeah, I was talking about this with our graphic designer Andy earlier, and I think Dukakis Bush is the first election where I was old enough to actually know who the candidates were. I mean, my first clear memory of a conversation about an election or even about politics, right, is 1984. I would have been 4 years old. And I can remember my dad was like in the kitchen reading the newspaper, and I like came down breakfast, and I must have known that there was something, somebody won, somebody lost, because I can distinctly remember asking who won, and him said, Reagan. He just sounded so fucking sad, right? It's always stuck in my head. But yeah. I certainly didn't know as a 4-year-old who Reagan was running against. But Dukakis I knew as an 8-year-old.
Okay, yeah. My uncle actually worked. He's a lighting guy, and so he is not a Republican, but he worked on Reagan's campaign in 1984 doing lighting, and he was telling my grandfather about it at the time, who was in Minnesota, and with the rest of the state was, the one middle finger to the rest of the country in 1984. And my uncle was saying, "Yeah, it was right by Reagan," and my grandfather's response was, "Did you shoot him?"
Yeah, fair.
You need amazing lighting to win 49 states.
Yeah, I mean, that's aesthetics were a big part of that campaign, as a lot of these are. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. How do you want to do this? You want to start in chronological order? That would get us the Prohibition Party as the first of the ones that we decided to cover.
Sure. Oh, boom. Yeah.
I love that image.
So yeah, the theme of the podcast, as you mentioned, is failed presidential candidates, and we try to bounce around history, so we're not starting like in the 1700s and just going election by election with every candidate. We're going back and forth, getting a diverse range of time periods as well as ideologies. But we're both lefties and kind of looking at things through a Marxist lens. So this is kind of a fun way to help understand a given historical moment in our place in history as well. But Prohibition Party, that was the first episode we did about a political party, which is still around. They're running somebody.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, they're running somebody in this election, 2024, and for the first time this go around, they are easing off prohibition. They are still called the Prohibition Party, but they're saying we're really more invested in cigarette advertising and vaping and things like that. We don't want to take away your drink, which is a tough sell when they're still called the Prohibition Party.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say, somebody says you got to vote for the Prohibition Party, but don't worry, we're not going to do prohibition. I'm just not going to believe them.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, they'll sneak it in. Yeah.
Yeah. They're a fascinating group of folks because the prohibition, oddly enough, was like a big lull for the party because this does kind of come up.
I mean, they won. Well, like, what's their platform going to be at that point?
Right. Well, throughout the 20s, it was basically enforcement because after we did a constitutional amendment, it's very difficult to enforce alcohol prohibition because, as the guest we had on talking about it, alcohol just grows naturally everywhere. So they wanted like basically a Gestapo state of some kind to crack down on alcohol.
I do know, speaking of presidential losers, I remember hearing this story many years ago about Al Smith when he announced his presidential campaign in 1928, right? So prohibition's definitely still in place. And like after the announcement, he invited all the reporters over to his house for a drink. Does suggest maybe the Prohibition Party had a point that, enforcement wasn't always rigorous.
Right.
Yeah, there was some prohibition people. I think there was a woman who was involved in the enforcement who campaigned against him. They used the Catholic thing, but a lot of it was about prohibition. Yeah, the dirty secret of the Prohibition Party is they're not the ones who got prohibition done.
Yeah,
it was done by the Anti-Saloon League, which was basically the APAC of the 1910s. They just were able to kind of get in good with people of both parties, get the amendment, and then prohibition goes away, and people are like, we're never going to do that again. But the Prohibition Party is like, we're not going away. And they're just campaigning for fewer and fewer people. And their current candidates are mostly people who are too dorky to be libertarians.
Yeah, it is a dilemma that's faced by a lot of third parties in the United States, including ones on the left, where it's like, well, what do we do when a major party takes up one of our issues? And in this case, it was kind of both parties for a time that were taking up temperance. So for a while there, they were, thinking about completely folding, but they decided to stick it out, which I'm grateful for. But that is definitely a theme that comes up a lot. Like William Jennings Bryan gets the Populist Party endorsement. They basically close up shop and throw all their support to him because of the silver issue. Meanwhile, you have the prohibition people who at the time are trying to debate whether or not they are just talking about prohibition, or they talk about other issues. And that's another funny quirk of single issue parties. When you try to have a broader platform, there's very little agreement because everyone in the room is there for alcohol. You have people who are pro women's rights, anti women's rights. It's just like kind of a mess. So that, yeah, they've definitely been the most entertaining entity we've covered so far.
Yeah, I mean, when's the last time? I mean, like, actually, okay, so like, what's like the high watermark of like Prohibition Party candidates as far as like actual electoral success?
So that is the thing with third parties is I think it was 1892, and they can cost a candidate from the major parties the margin of victory in a swing state. So I think they cost maybe Harrison the margin of victory in one state against like Grover Cleveland, something like that. I believe it was 1892 was their peak. It's definitely that era.
Yeah, whoever was Cleveland was running against the first time, and there was the actually governor of Kansas at the time was a Prohibition party guy, and he was running for president, and he split the vote in, I think it was in Kansas, and the people of Kansas who were Republicans were really upset at him. They burned him in effigy. He's the nadir of his time.
Well, speaking of naders, we've also got the nadir of our time on the list that you sent me.
Ooh, boom, yeah.
So skipping 108 years after the 1892 election, although I guess only 104 years because he did run the first time in 96, right? Like that was like kind of nobody noticed, right? But he did technically run then.
Yeah. And which in 1892, only 10 years or so before Ralph Nader was born.
I will say as a guy who was like 17 in the year 2000, like I don't think people really talk that much about him running until the recount. Like he was pretty under the radar, at least. I mean, I was a 17-year-old in high school, but like it wasn't like a huge issue him until the recount and things kind of looked bad in Florida and all that stuff.
Yeah,
I will say my experience is different, but you probably are right. Like for most people, right? Like I was actually I was in college. I was a really adamant Nader supporter. I had a Nader Leduc button, that I wore around. That was actually the first vote that I ever cast because I was 18 in 98, so I could have voted in like the Michigan gubernatorial election then, but I didn't. So yeah, first vote I ever cast was for Nader, and I was very excited about it, right? Like, and I think he probably did get at least more attention during the campaign than third-party candidates typically would, which is not to say that people are necessarily that focused on it. Because if, one, he actually did get like a kind of surprising amount of like celebrity support. And two, he did, like people always forget this now, right? Because like, Nader now, I think like 99% of people who've heard of him, I'm sure free association test, right? Like for the word Nader would be like Florida. But like, look, Ralph Nader was a household name many, many years before he ran for president.
Yeah. He to me, he is kind of in a way the genesis for this podcast because he's a big actually influence on my politics. Pre-Bernie, I was a teenager during the Bush administration. I was too young to vote in 2000, but I remember as a little older. He was really the one kind of finger that you're not finger in the wind, the one fist in the air, speaking out against the war, and was not a libertarian, was talking about the need to take the money we're spending on Iraq and military bases overseas, spend it at home domestically on things like national health insurance. So that, for me, watching the documentary about him, An Unreasonable Man, really began kind of a political journey and helped me see politics in a different light. I eventually kind of parted ways with him in multiple ways, but fun
fact, when I was promoting my first book, I went on his podcast and I told him at the beginning it was an honor to speak to him, and I voted for him twice. And he immediately was like, well, what about the third time?
Yeah. Definitely some character flaws there. I think it's safe to say a bit curmudgeonly. But as you said, like in the 60s, he was a hero, and people don't realize how many bills, how many laws came into fruition because of him. Seatbelts, of course, but the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, FOIA, getting FOIA requests, that came from Ralph Nader. He was like basically acted as a senator without being a senator. Like he would write laws and just make them pass them. But he eschewed running for office basically until the neoliberal turn, when he couldn't get he had no other way to influence things. He just got shut out. And then by 92, he did kind of a very confusing thing where he was a write-in candidate in the primaries, in both the Republican and Democratic primaries. And he was like, I'm not a candidate, but you can write me in as a protest. This is inherently confusing.
That's so lazy. That's such a 90s grunge thing. Like, okay, yeah, I'm not running, but yeah, just write me in.
Right. And then, he does run in 96, but to this day, he'll still say, oh, that didn't count. And I think that's for legal reasons, because his campaign was like kind of illegal. Like he made it a point to not raise any money. And he was like, I'm going to spend.
So he didn't have to do like filings and stuff. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And he tried to spend under $5,000 and just do speeches and like not, pay for lit or anything. And then you had like state green parties putting him on the ballot and stuff. So the FEC was definitely like looking around about that. And then 2000 is really the kind of the high watermark, and it unfortunately kind of went downhill from there. 2004, 2008, he doesn't do as well. Counterfactual, I think is what if he decided to run in the Democratic primaries, because in 2019 he admitted in a very rare Ralph Nader moment, he admitted, I should have done that because
he was incredibly popular for a long time, right? I mean, it's like, again, like how many, look, I've been in car accidents. My life has certainly been saved by Ralph Nader. Lots of people's have, right? And he was primarily seen in that light, right? And I think he was even polling really well, right? Like, in like the sort of lead up to running for president for real for the first time. So it's I guess it's unknowable, but I can imagine.
He could have won maybe in 04 because this Howard Dean is making noise. He could have out-Deaned Howard Dean. And that primary was pretty wide open. None of the candidates were great. Obviously, then Kerry ends up winning it. I did remember about Nader. I actually met him. Well, I didn't meet him, but I saw him speak. Like he came to my college in 04, or like in the lead up to 04. And the Iraq war had made me liberal enough or left enough, whatever, that I went and saw him. And he did seem electric. I don't remember anything that he actually said. I remember he had split with the Green Party because they wanted to run a safe state solution. He was not a safe state guy at that point.
Yeah, that's right. It's also, I also think, like, I always wondered, because he did, like, that was definitely, the Green Party did end up going for David Cobb, who was the safe state strategy guy. But I always wonder, it's like, is he, I don't know. If like Nader had like actually gone to the convention and like really tried to get the nomination, like, not that it would have mattered, right? But it seems like he could have at least gotten the Green Party nomination in 04. There might have been a little bit of, Cornel West syndrome going on there. But yeah, no, I think that actually is a really interesting counterfactual. As you say, we ended up getting John Kerry, who I actually was thinking when we were talking about which candidates to do. It occurred to me to suggest Kerry, but I forgot to do it, because that guy has always kind of fascinated me as like just this as just this like horrific like charisma vacuum.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he's we haven't done an episode on him yet, but we definitely will now that it's the 20-year anniversary of the 2004 election. I actually this is a few years ago, but I actually read his memoir, sadly. It's to admit, but I
read these things.
Yeah. But he is he believes that the JFK assassination was a conspiracy. I mean, he doesn't mention that too much in the memoir, but he's with the Skull and Bones Society. Yet, like he and Bush were both in Skull and Bones, I think.
I remember
there's
that,
something, weird going on with the deep state stuff. But yeah, just a pretty clear example of problems with Democrats. Like he couldn't commit to a stance on the war, which was the most pressing issue at that time in 2004.
Let me say something about the JFK. That would have been the perfect October surprise and counterfactual. He reveals who killed JFK. I mean, he just trounces Bush at that point.
Because it probably would have been Bush's dad. Which
I was just thinking, wasn't Dallas at the time, and not entirely explain what was going on there. I'm just saying, but
A detail from his memoir I always remember is because he was in Vietnam. He pretty frankly admits he served in the Navy for political advantage. But when he got home, then he became a member of Vietnam Veterans Against the War, and he was part of a demonstration where they threw their medals at I think the Pentagon, the U.S. Capitol, or something like that. And he's like, "Yeah, I really would have preferred to set them respectfully on a white tablecloth in front of the building." So even back then, he's trying to hedge his bets and come across as appealing as he can to Middle America.
He is the first guy I voted for. The basic idea with him, I think there was even a website, John Kerry is a D-bag, but I'm voting for him anyway. And that was kind of the vibe. I remember
can't believe that didn't work.
Yeah, checking the box and being like, don't screw this up, Kerry. And then he's the only Democrat to lose the popular vote. Basically in my lifetime, as I remember the 88 election, but not too much.
That's one thing I'm gonna have to reevaluate is because I as a an aughts kid, I definitely was sharing the Bush stole Ohio in 2004 thing on MySpace at the time. But since that was written by RFK Jr. in 2005, 2006, and at the time it's like, oh, there's a Kennedy, it must be true. But I've been thinking like maybe I should check into that again.
Might be a bad inference, yeah.
The thing is, sorry,
please.
Oh, he lost the popular vote either way. Yeah, the Electoral College. I have these questions. We're going to definitely dive deep on that. But either way, lose the popular vote.
Right. Yeah, right. Because the big conspiracy theory was about the voting machines in Ohio, which is kind of funny because that ended up like so many details that ended up getting repurposed as the mega conspiracy theory in 2020, right? Is about the, some of the same machines even, right? That was like a big theme in the Stop the Steal narrative. So it's that I don't know. I'm a little bit inclined to think I do also remember buying into that in 2004, but I'm a little inclined to think that there's a good chance that wasn't true. It's a little bit like I can remember, I can remember a time when I took JFK, assassination conspiracy theories very seriously. And, I don't know, I'd watched the Oliver Stone movie. I was all, hyped up about this. And like a lot of that was based on this like logistical stuff about the gunshots and all of this. And then I've got to say, after 9/11, seeing 9/11 truthers felt like I was looking into a very awkward mirror on that, because it was like, oh, wait a second, this is just as stupid, isn't it? Because like the way that everybody pretends that like they're a structural engineer, when they're talking about the building 7 and all that stuff, it's like, yeah, I'm not a ballistics expert. What do I know, right, about how the like gunshots would have ricocheted? But
my favorite 9/11 thing is there's people who think there were no planes on 9/11. No planes. And that's the only conspiracy
that's like
my
the
mom.
Advanced conspiracy theory. Yeah.
That's the only one my mom could disprove that. Like because she saw,
she saw a plane flying over.
People in
I knew someone who saw the Pentagon get hit too. Yeah. I mean, I will say I am.
Oh, they saw the missile.
Yeah. I guess so. I will say I'm somewhat sympathetic to the idea that they let it happen 9/11, but I don't understand how you can have that and then also believe the controlled demolition thing, because like if they like let it happen, why would they go and take the extra risk to actually like plant bombs in these trade centers and have the like? It would probably be enough to have the planes like smash.
Yeah, that always seemed like a weird extra step. That's like, well, okay, what? Well, it's like if you're going to do the bombs, why bother with the planes? I mean, it's like why cover up the bombs? Because like most terrorist attacks have been bombs, so that's what people would be expected anyway.
Yeah,
right? Like why do bombs and then mask them as like the result of plane crashes?
Yeah, there had been a successful. I mean, it didn't knock the tower down, but there had been a bombing in '93.
Yeah, 93.
The only thing was that they just didn't have a big enough bomb. So like the stage was definitely set for a bomb to happen again, and then it's this plane thing.
And they learned their lesson. They're like, "What? Why? Wait, let's think outside the bomb. Let's use planes next time."
Yeah. Well, speaking of Kennedys, we've got Ted Kennedy.
Yes.
Who ran for president as like a rare, I guess on the Democratic side, this was the last like serious primary challenge to a sitting president.
Yeah. This is one of our more popular episodes. This is really interesting looking back on this because, leading up to this election now, I remember I've been talking with friends, every day about like, why can't somebody primary Biden? Why can't somebody primary Biden? And this is usually the example that gets trotted out. And it's really fascinating in retro how the forces of kind of the left in America were kind of aligning in the late 70s, early 80s after some defeats. They were starting to kind of come back and stand up to Carter, and Kennedy was starting to sort of galvanize some of that. Organized labor, civil rights groups were starting to work together in a way that they hadn't been doing previously.
Yeah, I mean, it is like a really weird fact looking back on it that Ted Kennedy, who was not running the man was not running on Bernie Sanders' platform, right? I mean, like this is not a particular, I don't know. I mean, I always, you guys know more about the campaign than I do, right? But it's like my impression of Ted Kennedy was always he was a pretty mainstream guy, but he was that run against Carter, right? In 80, he was endorsed by like the proto DSA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
his big thing was his big thing was the healthcare. He was for universal healthcare. He'd written a book about it in '72. So he's the proto Bernie with the healthcare. I remember growing up. I mean, he was considered the most left-leaning Democrat. But yeah, he was definitely the left side of the establishment. But on healthcare, he was doing the full thing. And then he was upset that Carter didn't prioritize healthcare and did an energy bill instead in '77.
Right, healthcare and also price controls, because Carter was. I mean, there was a little bit, but Carter was not using the full force of his economic power in the way that even Nixon had to deal with inflation, deal with the economy, and Kennedy was talking about that. There were a lot of other things where he's kind of a blank slate and vague, but on those issues, he was pretty close to Sanders. He even in '79. Is leading Carter by a lot. So it would look like he was going to beat Carter in the primary. And then Reagan was looking like he was going to get the Republican nomination. That was kind of uncharted territory at this point to have like an entertainer president. So many people assumed that Reagan's not going to win. So the common wisdom for a few months there was like Ted Kennedy's going to be the next president. And then he just has this awful meltdown interview. It goes on it's on national television, and he has to talk about Chappaquiddick, and all these years later still just doesn't have a good answer for like what happened there. Why is this woman dead? Why didn't you do anything? And yeah, would also had a tendency to kind of he would talk, and it wouldn't always make sense when he was nervous. That didn't do him any favors.
There was another thing he did in that interview is they asked him, why do you want to be president? And he's like, and like, there's enough of a gap, and it's it's bad. It's like, okay, he just thinks it's his legacy or something. Like that is a big problem. And then the hostages happen, the Iranian hostages happen, and that helps Carter a lot too.
Yeah. Carter all of a sudden seems like much more presidential now that there's a hostage situation. But yeah, his answer to the why do you want to be president question begins with because we have great natural resources. Like that's his rationale is parks and stuff. Yeah, and I don't think he actually wanted to be president either. That's kind of a theme that came up. Is his two older brothers got assassinated trying to do that, so it probably spooked him to a degree.
Yeah, I mean the Chappaquiddick thing, I guess, at least proves that he didn't inspire that Trump level of you can shoot a guy in Fifth Avenue loyalty, right? Like it's like you cannot, as it turns out, be ambiguously criminally negligent in the death of a woman and maintain your supporters' loyalty as Kennedy.
I do love about Kennedy. Him and Carter really didn't like each other. Like Carter was coming up, and Carter's a little bit more of a nerd. And then Ted, it seems like it's his birthright to be president. And Carter was like looking out for him for a long time. And then once Carter's in, they don't like each other. And a thing Carter did that really upset Kennedy, and a secret reason why he might have run is, oh, nice. Yeah, healthcare. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's what he should have said.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. If he had said, I'm running to give you guys all healthcare, that would have been amazing. That is kind of what Bernie did. I mean, he did the college too. But Kennedy is really into sailing. Like he's like the real life guy, like in Wedding Crashers, sailing's like sex to these people. His memoirs are all about sailing. And he mentioned, and this is like 30 years later that when he's writing these, he's about to die, but he's like, Jimmy Carter sold the presidential yacht and it was defiled by rich people after this. And that might have been the thing that had put him over the top to run.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just that upset on behalf of the presidential yacht.
Yeah.
JFK had been on it during the Cuban Missile Crisis. It went back to like Herbert Hoover or something. It was a big deal to Ted.
Oh my God. Can you imagine if JFK is on it during the Cuban Missile Crisis, everybody thinks it's JFK on a yacht while everybody thinks the world's about to end. That's got to be an amazing party.
Right. Oh, yeah. I would not want to look over that thing with a black light after.
Yeah, fair enough. The conventional wisdom, as you say, is that like this proves that it's a bad thing to challenge an incumbent president in the primaries because Ted Kennedy did the challenge and then Reagan won. But like, I mean, how seriously do you take that causation? Because that's not at all obvious to me.
Yeah, especially there's other examples that get kind of glossed over. One being Ted's brother, Bobby Kennedy, who didn't run until Eugene McCarthy, who we'll have to do an up on at some point. He comes really close, doesn't beat Johnson, who's president, is overseeing the Vietnam War, comes close to beating Johnson in New Hampshire. And then after that, Bobby Kennedy steps into the race and Johnson withdraws. So there are examples of pushing an incumbent out, which I think someone should have tried to do that, as well as in 1952, Truman is eligible as well to run again, and he doesn't, because of Estes Kefauver, who is a populist senator from Tennessee, does surprisingly well and is able to push Truman out. So that has happened, and I was, really hoping. I mean, people did run, of course, but no one serious, unfortunately, ran and really tried to. I think that was kind of the best case scenario. Someone can at least push Biden out, not necessarily beat him head to head, but at least be enough of an embarrassment that he has to call it quits.
Yeah, I mean, granted, they did a very good job of, like announcing very early on there were going to be no debates and having like, they did a very good job of conveying the impression that there was no primary, but also, Marianne Williamson, who, I've met and I think is a very nice lady, but like I don't, I don't think she had the kind of national profile that it would take to to be able to do that effectively. Though I do like be able to tell people now accurately that I've danced with the second place winner in the 2020 South Carolina primary. Because at Crystal and Kyle's wedding, nice.
Nice.
So it's one of those things that technically is true, right? It's wildly misleading, right?
Yeah.
She got like 1% of the vote, but yeah, that's but the highest profile one was RFK, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and he's fucking insane, and he talks about how like COVID was possibly a bioweapon that was like intended to like spare Jews and Chinese people, right? Like, so it's like he did make it pretty easy for them to convey the impression that, Biden didn't have any real challengers.
Yeah, I will say I've been walking around in this summer heat, and I think as, an Irish Norwegian, there might be some kind of Chinese weapon directed at my skin because it's been turning red and it's very painful. It's maybe there's something to that, but yeah, he I think maybe stood a chance, but not in the Democratic primary at the end of the day. I mean, it kind of makes sense in retrospect that he decided to go that route and then moved to independent because he got his profile up, but I actually thought for a while maybe he would do a lot better than it looks like he will, but I think just the two-party system is too powerful in America that it's going to prevent RFK from getting it because it is hard to tell who he takes more from, Biden or Trump.
That's true. Although also like, yeah, I mean, I don't know that he could have ran in the Republican primary because I mean, a lot of Republicans like him. It's true, but like also, there's like a crusading environmental lawyer who is always pro-choice, and like I think if he'd actually tried to mix it up in Republican primary, and like also like all of the issues that people like him on, it's like I don't know. I mean, like Donald Trump's got a lot of that going for him. Like, so it's like if you're like a weird conspiracist who is, I mean, like there are things I guess he could say, he was always anti-vax and, Trump has been, inconsistent on it or whatever, but like, I don't know how far that gets him.
Yeah. I mean, he really is the worst of both worlds on Israel because he's just like dyed in the wool, pro-Israel, like they can do no wrong. The Palestinians are a pampered people, just like a unbelievable thing to say.
But he's also pretty anti-Semitic. Yeah.
Right. That's the thing. Is he's also, it would be one thing if like he wasn't also anti-Semitic, but it's like this is. I mean, I guess it's a good example we can point to and be like, there are a lot of anti-Semites who like Israel, but it would be at least.
It's sort of hard to see who it's for.
Right. Yeah. I mean, just to have him bringing that, if he was number one, not anti-Semitic, and then also pro-Palestinian, that would have been good to have that, in the discourse if he was still challenging Biden. But it's kind of a missed opportunity.
Yeah, there was.
I would support.
Oh, sorry, you were saying.
Oh yeah, I would support if he wasn't just bad on every issue. Yeah, he's basically to the right of Biden on most things, at least the way he's actually campaigning. And then he's to the right of Trump on vaccines. He's like solely for people who are mad that Trump did Operation Warp Speed, which is probably the best.
That's the demo. Yeah, right. No, that's totally right. Like, and he's also he's actually also terrible on healthcare, right? He's like, it's not even clear that he completely supports a public option, I mean, not that he's talked a lot about it, but like the comments that he did make. So yeah, no, that's exactly the thing. Yeah. If he weren't fucking insane and he didn't have terrible positions on every issue, then, yeah, I'd love him. But, easy to imagine hypothetical. Okay. Well, we do still have, I think the two funniest ones on the list that you sent me left to do, right? So I know Freddie said we were talking about this before. that, or I think you might have said this on Twitter, that having, that like running for president and losing is just an innately funny thing to have happen to anybody, because like your life must have been going so well up until then, right? Like, and then,
These are very successful people, and then they become completely humiliated. I'm not sure what we're talking about next, but they're all pretty humiliated in their own unique ways.
Yeah, well, I think we'll save for last the most humiliated one, and also, to my mind, the funniest one, which is Mitt Romney. But we have one more in the third party category that you sent me, who's surely one of the funniest failed presidential candidates, who is Ross Perot.
Oh yes. Kind of people have called him a proto-Trump. I think there's something to that, billionaire running for president. But a guy who was like also didn't have was a blank slate on a lot of things, was running really as, in a strange paradox. He was a populist billionaire and also a populist who was like an extreme austerian. Like, he didn't just believe in slashing spending. He also wanted to raise people's taxes to pay off the debt, which I talked to Rob Larson who's been on the show about it. And I like, what would happen if we canceled the debt? Because that's kind of like a common sense thing for a lot of people, is like, well, if the economy's bad, it must be because the government owes a bunch of money. But that would be just disaster economically for the entire world if the U.S. had zero debt. So an example of how being good at business does not necessarily make you a good politician. At the same time, though, there was a few months there in 1992 where he was doing better than Clinton and Bush, and maybe could have been president if he was a little less insane.
So I was like go ahead.
Oh yeah, please.
Oh yeah, I was like an 8-year-old, and he talked about like the national referendums, or like the plebiscites. I was very into that. And we Anders had Rob on. I wasn't available for that interview, but he said like there's a recession going on in 92. So if you did austerity the way Perot wanted, it would have made the recession go for like 10 years. He could have single-handedly caused another Great Depression. And his weirdest thing, Perot, is that he had the strategy of, the conventions are coming up, I'll just drop out for 2 months and then rejoin for the debates.
Yeah, that's pretty brilliant. So yeah, I mean, like, let's do the scenic route here. I mean, before he decided to run for president, who is this guy?
He's a computer salesman from the Texas-Arkansas border. That's another interesting thing about 1992. You have 3 guys running who are all from that region. Yeah. But he is a very talented salesman and manages to make a lot of money selling computers to the government, to other places, and also is a big advocate on behalf of the POW-MIA movement, and is a big believer after the Vietnam War that there's a bunch of guys who are like stuck there in tunnels or in the middle of the jungle or something. They're just being held there in prison camps or something, and we have to send people to get them. So he invested a lot of money in that movement, which is another conspiracy theory. But he also
the Hamas tunnels,
right.
Yeah. I always wondered about that too, because it's like above and beyond the question of what exactly would be in it for the Vietnamese to like secretly like hold POWs who like they weren't using as leverage for anything. They were just like, it must have just been there for their own satisfaction, right? That they were holding them. And it's like, also, I don't know, man, how it seems like these tiger cages or wherever they were holding them must have been way more humane than we thought if people were still kicking in 92.
Right. Yeah. Perot also has some weird thing with hostages. He takes credit for the for Iranian hostages or American hostages in Iran being like let out, and he like makes a TV movie about it. So he's like a very kind of pro-military guy, very patriotic on that, and is able somewhat to parlay that into series of presidential campaigns, but also really hard to pin down ideologically. Like he's very pro austerity, as we said, but he's pro choice. And then on a lot of issues, he's just like, okay, you tell me. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll do a plebiscite. Yeah,
right.
There's some Rambo in the chat. Yeah, so, his slogan should have been "Perot, do we get to win this time?"
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's so yeah. I mean, what was most memorable probably from Perot, who ran in both 92 and 96. Like, I guess 92 actually is also an interesting year for presidential losers because Ted Kennedy was the last major challenge to an incumbent on the Democratic side, but I think the last one on the Republican side was Pat Buchanan in 92. But Perot running in both 92 and 96 is important because he did, he obviously was never going to like win, with that brilliant dropout for 2-month strategy and all that. But he did get a lot of votes both times. And I mean, you kind of mentioned, Freddie, I think earlier that, John Kerry did, was such an amazing campaigner that like 2004 was one of the only times a Democrat lost the popular vote. In your lifetime, right? I mean, which you'd have to go back to Dukakis, right? Before that, right? But like, but of course, Bill Clinton, didn't lose the popular vote. He got a plurality of the popular vote both times, but he never got an outright majority, right? Because of Perot.
True. Yeah, that's true. That's an interesting one. I like to say to centrist Democrats, "Oh, Clinton only won because of Perot," but I think a lot of the political science on that shows that it probably would have gone that way, just because it was kind of an anti-incumbent year, and so enough voters would have split off and voted for Clinton. But it is kind of unfortunate, though, that Clinton ended up being pro-NAFTA politically too, because a lot of those voters who that's another big issue for Perot was trade. He was warning people about NAFTA, albeit for quirky reasons in many cases. But if Clinton he was kind of agnostic on NAFTA during the 92 campaign and ends up signing it a year later. But if he had been anti-NAFTA, he could have folded those voters over into the Democratic coalition, and ultimately it just would have been, the problems with NAFTA can get overstated, but we would have been much better in the long run to have all those people not voting for ultimately Trump, if Clinton hadn't set the stage for them. That it would have been better politically and economically and just socially to not have NAFTA and to have Clinton competing for those votes.
Yeah,
that's what you feel about. Oh, sorry. That's how I feel about Clinton. If Clinton did popular policies, he would have been really great.
Yeah.
I mean, so obviously, I mean, I think NAFTA, I mean, how much difference it made is, there's probably more nuanced conversation to be had about that, but I mean, certainly it was part of a set of trade deals that did decrease the bargaining power of industrial unions because they made it easier to threaten people with outsourcing. But Perot, I mean, as I think you were kind of suggesting a minute ago, in certain respects, even though, he was pro-choice and sort of didn't care about a lot of issues or whatever, there were certain respects in which he was the proto-Trump. I mean, he was the billionaire pseudo-populist who talked all the time about how he made bad trade deals, right? That's and in Perot's case, certainly, even though I think there was some evidence later that his beef with NAFTA was really a lot of that had to do with his specific business interests, but he did make this populist appeal to oppose it, right? I mean, the sort of phrase that he was most, stuck in everybody's memories the most maybe was the thing about the giant sucking sound of the.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The thing that was nice about Perot is that he did those infomercials, and I watched one recently before the episode, and it really feels like he's pitching a business to you. Like he really treats you like you're a partner. He's not just saying talking about. He's getting his details. He's got pie charts. Now there is a thing with the infomercials. He's a computer guy. There's no computers in the infomercial. He's holding printed slides. I know he sold computers, but he seems like a guy who never actually used a computer. Perot. I think he sold computers, but I doubt he ever actually used one. And that's my conspiracy theory.
I think they were like not personal computers, because this is before that was really a thing. They were just like industrial, like for an office, you have a computer that, I guess this is like proto AI kind of, you try to do data, whatever kind of administrative thing you have to do for the office, you use just this giant computer that takes up the entire room.
The mainframes and the terminals. Yeah, my mom worked in that era. But still, usually the guy selling it's like a computer user, and I really don't believe he ever used a computer. And if you guys have proved me wrong, but I do not think that exists.
Yeah, that's fair. Before we leave Perot, I've got to bring up the there's so many odd things about Ross Perot, but this has got to be my favorite. That he gifted a sword to Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, for veterans, because that's again one of his big issues is the military and treating veterans right. And if we are gonna spend money at the federal level, it should go to them. And Bernie was on the Veterans Committee and was fighting for their benefits, and so he rewarded him with the sword, which I don't know if it's the one from that like commercial from the 90s, like the Marine Corps commercial where the guy's like fighting a knight with a sword. But it's cool.
Yeah.
Right now I want a remake of Rambo 2. Sorry. A remake of Rambo 2. It's Perot in like 96. Bernie's still like 60, and they go and just exactly shot for shot remake of Rambo 2.
So reading the article, says sword was mightier than politics. Senator Bernie Sanders posted a tribute to self-made billionaire Ross Perot, who died Tuesday. This is an article from right after that. And revealed the two-time third-party presidential candidate once gifted him a bejeweled blade for his work on a veterans bill. Ross Perot's champion of veterans' rights is one of the kind American. Sanders added he will be missed. The 2020 Democratic presidential contender's tweet was accompanied by an image of the sword meant to replicate King Arthur's legendary weapon Excalibur mounted on a plaque.
That sword is the only thing that can slay the duopoly. That sword. And Bernie has it. So Bernie, we need you to bring that sword out.
Well, fair enough. Now, look, some of this is a matter of taste. Your mileage may vary, but I've already said, to my mind, the funniest failed presidential candidate is Massachusetts Mitt Romney, who
you have the picture of him pumping gas.
we should have gotten the picture of him pumping gas, but we do have a clip that's sort of a compilation of Romney moments that was going around at the time.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Mitt Romney et je suis président du comité d'organisation des Jeux Olympiques d'hiver.
This is the guy on the airplane with you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's
his name is Sky Blue.
Sky Blue.
Yeah. Mine is dull gray, but by the way, we're friendly. He calls me his homeboy now, and I'll take him as a tax deduction on my income taxes.
I don't know what any of that means. Now,
this is a fabulous state. It's a remarkable country. I really love America.
Brett, I don't know how many hundred times I've said this too. This is an unusual interview. All right, let's do it again.
Oh my goodness, can I shake some hands around here? Is that all right? My goodness, what's going on here today? Look at this. This is terrific.
I think people don't appreciate actually his sense of humor.
Well, yeah. I mean, I live for laughter. I mean,
who let the dogs out? Who?
You,
I'm speaking.
I'm speaking.
The
I'm speaking.
newspaper.
I'm
It's
speaking.
time for you.
Is that your mom next to you there?
No.
No, friend. And
of attention at the debate, but for the straw poll, it's considerably. Mitt Romney, Governor.
Hey, Carl.
What a great surprise!
Good to see you.
We're on live with Shepard Smith.
Oh, hey, Shep, how you doing? This is a great evening. Isn't this fun out here in Iowa? It's a great state.
It is.
Well, I like music of almost any kind, including this. I believe in the Bible.
Does that mean you believe every word? Yeah, I believe it's the word of God.
So what does restructuring of Social Security mean? It doesn't mean that I don't think.
The Bible is the word of God. I mean, I'm USA! Capitalism. I might interpret the word differently than you interpret the word, but I read the Bible, and I believe the Bible is the word of God. I don't disagree with the Bible. I try and live by it.
And what about that Sarah Palin? She's not ready to be president, is she?
She's terrific. She really is. She's terrific.
I have a lot of 60s music and some 70s music, mostly rock. I like country music.
I love the greatness of America.
The Beatles. I mean, the Beatles were phenomenal.
Don't run away. I'll shake your hand anyways. I know you haven't got your makeup on yet, right? You do. Good to see you.
But you know, we also watch American Idol. This year with Scotty winning, that was terrific. That guy's got talent.
Let's blame the insurance company.
No,
they're greedy. They.
Unlike the rest of us, they're greedy, right? Yeah. Right. I actually like jokes as well as things that are sort of fun. My son's like spontaneous humor, not jokes, but I like it all.
Capitalism and free enterprise.
I love that song. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain.
USA! USA!
Just finished President Bush's book, Decisions, and enjoyed that very much.
I love the Constitution.
Rick, I'll tell you what. $10,000? $10,000 bet?
Capitalism.
I support the Second Amendment. I purchased a gun when I was a young man. I've been a hunter pretty much all my life. USA! I'm not a big game hunter. I made it very clear. I've always been, if you will, a rodent and rabbit hunter. All right, small varmints, if you will.
I love humor. I'm running for office, for Pete's sake. I can't have illegals.
I must admit, I love America.
I like silly stuff too. I mean, I like the Twilight series. I thought that was fun. And I mean, you like vampires? I don't like vampires personally. I don't.
USA! USA!
Doesn't smoke, doesn't drink, doesn't swear.
Not very often.
Not very often?
No.
My feelings and passion for Anne haven't changed in the slightest over the years, other than to become stronger.
Gosh, golly.
Well, but those don't qualify as swear words.
Foreclosures and bankruptcies and higher taxation. We're going to hang him with that, so to speak, metaphorically. When it's sunny and clear like this, with no precipitation, that's kind of a nice day. I missed anybody over here?
Yeah, we're just.
Ah, yes. Hi, Jennifer. How are you? Good to see you. Oh, she sits in the back row and hides out.
We got some coffee for you, Governor.
What?
Oh my god,
man, that was amazing. Who made that?
I'm not sure. It was something I watched many times back shortly after he ran for president when that was going around.
Yeah.
It was actually kind of hard to find it for tonight, but yeah, it's I am that man is just such an amazing bundle of awkwardness and
I got obsessed with him, yeah. But when we did the episode, he's just fascinating. And a big thing is so he speaks French because he was a mission for the Mormons in France. And his job was to convince the French to give up wine. And it was very tough, and that's why he doesn't take no for an answer.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, he is very dogged and determined, I think, because of that missionary experience. But as that video shows, he hates campaigning. He's not a people person. He's not good at interfacing with voters, with normal people. He really believes politics is a behind the scenes thing, and that's where he thrives, is behind the scenes, brokering for power. He'll give a nice speech, but he doesn't like campaigning at all, and that's he's freely admitted that now.
Yeah. So this is so he was the governor of Massachusetts before he runs for president, and this is we did as the cold open the Gingrich attack ad on him from 2012 that establishes that he knows how to speak French, and a big part of that is that he was a relatively moderate governor, that he did this sort of proto-Obamacare thing in Massachusetts, that of course had become, it's actually kind of amazing that he could do that and then still win the Republican nomination in 2012, when they were all obsessed with how much they hated Obamacare. But
they were desperate for somebody. They had a really bad group of candidates.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like Rick Santorum, I think won Iowa in 2012, but then it was like there was a week where like every individual got out of the clown car and they were like ahead in the polls for like 5 or 6 days, and then it was the next one.
Right.
My favorite was Herman Cain, the 9-on-9 plan. And then he gets caught with sexual harassment. He's like asking women, "Do you want a job?" Meaning, will you like sleep with me?
Yeah. Yeah. And Mitt was able to kind of just, get the Republican primary voters to say, finally relent and say, okay, fine, we'll go with you, even though going in, and this was, people confronted him about this in 2008 in a behind the scenes meeting. There's like there are 3 M's here. You're Mormon. That's weird. A lot of evangelicals in the South don't believe Mormonism is Christianity. You're also a multimillionaire. And you're from Massachusetts, the governor of Massachusetts, like that. Those 3 things, just that's going to be very difficult to overcome. And it is kind of impressive that he's able to do that in 2012 and actually convince Republicans that he should be the guy. And a lot of it is, because the other options stunk.
Yeah. And it's kind of hard to remember, but there was a point where the conventional wisdom was that, 2012, the economy still wasn't great. And so, be a referendum on Obama's performance. And I can actually vividly remember reading Nate Silver in the New York Times saying, okay, if it's one of these crazy people, then Obama will win. But yeah, if it's Romney, he'll win. Right, because he'll just be normal enough that it'll just be a referendum on Obama, and if things are kind of bad, then then Obama will lose. And I think the fact that isn't wasn't true. I mean, maybe some of that is about the fact that Obama was genuinely like an incredibly gifted political communicator. I mean, there's a reason why, he could sell the neoliberal, agenda much better than like Hillary Clinton could for you, or, et cetera. Right. Pete Buttigieg, whatever, like none of these people could do it as well as him. But also part of it was about Mitt Romney, right? Yeah. That he, he was doing, like, he seemed to lack nothing but like the big bag, like the sack with the dollar bill on the side and the monocle.
Yeah. So I really thought about him a lot. And like his strength as a person is like, you bring him information, he analyzes it and makes a good decision, but he's very flexible in his decision making. He doesn't like stand for stuff, and that works perfect in business. He made a lot of money investing in a lot of small companies and kind of figuring out where people would bring him ideas, and he would pick some, and some did really well. But he's not a guy who's going to like lay out an agenda and like galvanize people behind him. And that's really what it takes to win the presidential election, unless you're a conquering general like Eisenhower or Washington. But it can't be you or some private equity guy who costs people jobs.
Right. Yeah. As we said in the episode, he's Mormon, so he doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, doesn't do drugs, doesn't swear very often, apparently. But he does lay people off. And that's like where he gets that carnal satisfaction, is just making thousands of people jobless, which is what he's done in company after company. And I remember Matt Taibbi saying this at the time, that like he didn't understand why people disliked him flip-flopping on political issues, because he's like, in business, you change your brand based on what company you're at and trying to make money for. So that's what I'm doing here. It's the same thing. Don't you get that? And it's again, business is not politics, but like you said earlier, the class warfare theme, Obama, that was really effective, because they weren't sure what sort of narrative to use for Obama's 2012 election campaign, because he hadn't frankly gone after Wall Street in the way that, maybe he sort of vaguely suggested he would 4 years earlier. And then lo and behold, boom, you have this guy who's just the incarnation of the financial collapse, and they're able to weaponize that against him really effectively.
Yeah. I mean, in kind of it's kind of amazing actually, right? Because Obama, like when Obama was elected in 2008, right, he had a tremendous amount of Wall Street money behind him. When he came in 2009, he like filled his White House with like Goldman Sachs guys. But then Romney was just so like comically unlikably plutocratic that it actually allowed Barack Obama to run for re-election, like in as a populist, right? Like that, like as which is like really amazing. Like you could not have done that with any other candidate, but like with Romney was so bad that that he was actually able to. I mean, I could remember Obama ads that like, looking back on them, they feel like Bernie ads, right? Like that they had, there was one I remember that had like a voiceover. I mean, it might not have been an Obama campaign ad. It might've been like a super PAC or whatever. Right. But like it was, the voiceover was like a worker talking about being laid off. It was like and like the last thing they had to do was like build like the stage where they were going to like announce the layoffs. And it was like I was like having to build the scaffold, for your own hanging, because they were going after Bain Capital so hard, along those lines. Although the funniest thing about that, looking back on it, was Cory Booker of all people was sort of oddly principled in a weird way, and as an Obama surrogate, like refused to criticize private equity, even though that was like the private.
I remember that. Yeah. Oh, God.
Cory Booker's the weirdest because he's a member of the Vanquished. We haven't thought about him, but he looks so cool in this documentary when he's first running, I think, for mayor of is it Trenton or Newark?
Newark.
And then he becomes this like super corporate Democrat. I can't even remember. Is he still in office? You never really hear about him.
Yeah, he's in the Senate. But he was always he comes out of Wall Street. I think he may have worked at Bain, or if not Bain, some other firm like that. But he even in that, I don't know if I've watched that documentary. I know what you're talking about, but I think he's running
Street Fight. It's real good.
Yeah, but he's running like kind of a charter school type, like administration, which at that point seemed populist, right? That seemed like this is a new era. This is the new type of politics. Obama's a similar figure, but it's kind of vacuous and ultimately is, filled in by these managerial neoliberals.
Yeah. No, that's true. It's actually, I mean, like, I think it was, it is maybe a sign of exactly how much worse in some ways Democratic Party politics were at that point, right? I mean, people have trouble remembering this now, that it was completely acceptable and normal for prominent Democrats to go on and on about how much they love charter schools,
right?
In like the early 2000s, mid 2000s, totally fine, right? Yeah. Nobody held it against them.
A cool thing about getting back to Romney is he's a second generation member of the Vanquished. His dad also ran a failed.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, in East so yeah, I mean, I grew up in the Lansing area in Michigan, and of course in downtown Lansing there's a Romney building, right? Which is named after which is named after his dad, right? Who didn't he do something? Didn't he say he was like
brainwash?
Brainwash. Yeah, the brainwash line was the key thing. Yeah. You want to go ahead, Anders?
Well, yeah, he's a fascinating one. We'll have to do an episode on because he's Mormon, and his family had to basically flee the United States to Mexico because of polygamy laws, and then he comes back to the United States and is like a self-made millionaire and becomes governor of Massachusetts as a Republican, but a moderate to even, I would say, even a liberal Republican, even a progressive Republican in some, because at the time he's to the left of a lot of Democrats back then. But he was on civil rights, especially, which is not necessarily something he had to do politically. He picks that up and starts his campaign going to inner cities. And then on Vietnam, he says that he had been brainwashed by the generals earlier when he was for the war, and now he's against the war in 68, and that gets used against him, of course.
Sure.
But in a way, he's kind of like a weird sort of opposite of his son, because he is a genuine maverick. Like, he will just speak his mind and is very off the cuff and will take positions he's not supposed to take. And his son Mitt doesn't do that. He makes it a point to do the opposite of that. And he even in 2008 distributes a thesis report written at Brigham Young University. Just some random political science student went through the George Romney campaign and dissected where it went wrong. And Mitt Romney makes all of his staff read this thesis. He's really tries to avoid gaffes or controversial positions and ends up making them, ironically, because he's trying to avoid them. And then after he loses, then he kind of gets the spirit of his father in a way and feels a need to speak out against the Trumpism in the Republican Party, which is his father did similarly with Goldwater in 1964. But it's, you look at the history of Mitt Romney, especially his presidential campaigns, and he, I think, pretty clearly enabled and emboldened and at a minimum tolerated the sort of the Trumpist fringe elements. And, on a policy level, let's face it, frankly, in 2012, not that different when you're looking at the platform, not that different from Trump in 2016. I mean, trade would be the main difference, but he was very anti-immigration, was not a social liberal or progressive. And despite being governor of Massachusetts, which is another just oddity that he would choose there of all places to run, this is a very, as he said himself, a severely conservative guy.
That is his most hateable position, is on immigration. He says self-deportation.
Right.
I think means like, we will deny them economic opportunities and they'll just move back to Mexico or whatever. Wherever.
Yeah, it'll make life miserable enough that they'll just move back. Yeah.
And that's sort of and that's sort of less realistic than the wall. You could at least theoretically build some kind of wall, but you're not going to be able to keep people from hiring immigrants for like cheap labor or get people to move all the way back.
Yeah, right. I mean, like it's very unclear like how the self-deportation was supposed to work, because if people are already getting hired under the table, right? Like, I don't know if he really thought out the mechanics of that, or it was just something that like made him sound tough on immigrants in a Republican primary and just made him sound like weird and unpleasant to everybody else. He's also I mean, I guess maybe the last thing about Romney, Spudgecast points out most anybody's ever talked about Romney in the last 10 years. That's not true. They did a whole episode on him. That's
my wife keeps saying,
but he did have, again, this sort of comically plutocratic moment where he was at like a fundraiser, and I think a waiter took a video of his off the record comments. And the thing that was there was actually some really ugly, unrelated stuff in that video where he talks about how, I guess he says the quiet part loud to funders behind closed doors, where he says, he says that it's like, Israel, Palestine, 2-state solution, nothing's going to happen. We'll just kick the can down the road.
That was Obama's policy. Yeah.
Yeah, that was Obama's policy. Obama just never said it out loud that anybody knows of, right? But like the thing that was really famous from that was the makers and takers.
And the 47%.
Yeah. Paul Ryan, I guess, is the one with the makers and takers line, but yeah, Romney in the candid comments was the 47% of people, Americans, who said just want to are like parasites because they use government services.
Right.
Yeah, and he basically they don't pay any federal taxes. He has a way of things sticking to him. As I was watching the primary debates, Michelle Bachmann uses the same line, and the line was in a CNN article a few years before. But Mitt Romney saying, especially a secret rich people event, just has the stickiness to really hurt him.
Yeah, that sounds right. Well, okay, one last question. And I did warn you guys that I was going to ask this. So we are obviously just a few months away from another presidential election. So one way or another, somebody's going to be vanquished in November. So all other questions of morality and politics aside, just purely from your perspective as podcasters, who would be a better episode of your show, Biden or Trump?
Man, well, it really is hard to top Trump in terms of entertainment in as a presidential candidate. I can't imagine being like a student of history in 20, 30 years from now, and like you're learning about the past, and it's like up to Romney. You're like, okay, then there was Bush and Obama and then Romney, and then there was a reality show, like a mentally disabled reality show star who was the president somehow. That's pretty off the wall. So it's hard to top him, but Biden is just so quintessential in all the qualities of a losing campaign right now. I was just reading about Project 2025, all the stuff Trump has in store, or the people around him want to do if they get back in there. And I was like, okay, so what's the counter? What is Biden running on? And I looked up his website. There's nothing. There's no platform on the website. He doesn't have any like issues page where he says what he wants to do. So this is just, I think, the maybe the clearest example. Maybe it's a recency bias because Hillary Clinton, of course, is pretty bad in terms of all the mistakes you make as a campaign. But I think Biden 2024, man, this is one of the worst campaigns I think I've ever lived through. So it's hard to not give him a tie, but Biden, he's running a pretty lousy campaign.
Yeah, I also I think the Biden episode would be better because there's just so many mistakes Biden's made that liberals ignore. And it would be really cool to talk about that. What Trump's done bad, there's volumes and volumes on that. But yeah, Biden's platform is just like ignore the genocide and keep focusing on hating on Trump. And it's real. Like, I mean, I voted for him in 2020. My wife text back for him, and I just like deeply hate what he's doing with Israel. And then I wasn't thrilled with him before that. So it's tough.
Yeah, same. I mean, I do. There was just an Axios article about the Biden inner circle, who are like these three guys who've been with him for like the last 100 years, who whose job is to tell him that everything's going to be fine, and they're and like. It was really like kind of amazing, right? Like, because all these quotes from these guys and people who knew them and people who were like around us in the article were like, yeah, their strategy for winning the election is that they're going to remind people of January 6th and Trump's character, which, I mean, it would seem to me that Democrats have been continually reminding people of January 6th since at least January 7th, 2021. And that like we've been getting like constant, like nonstop libs talking about Trump's character since 2015, right? Since he came down the escalator to announce the first time. But I guess they're going to do it harder.
Yeah. It's that's the other thing that I think is going to make it fascinating. Hopefully won't, but if Biden does in fact lose, just the out of touchness, the refusal to face reality with the polls. That just there was an Isaac Chotiner interview with a Democratic strategist who runs a Substack that's literally called Hopium Chronicles, where he's just talking about how the polls are wrong or people are misinterpreting the polls, and just very clearly delusional. And like sort of you can tell there's like maybe a voice in the back of their head that's like, this isn't going so well, but they're just like determined to plow ahead. Unless maybe there's something that's going to happen in August. I still am holding out hope that maybe they'll swap Biden out, but at this point, that doesn't seem likely. But yeah, just the veil of confidence in it and refusal to face reality, I think, is going to be really stunning for a long time.
He's going to do so well in this debate, which I think like this Thursday, he's going to kill it. The thing with Trump is, we had the call. He called the people in Atlanta to like ask them to find votes. We heard the call. I think it was Jan 2021. So I've heard the call now. It's like over 3 years ago. They needed to expedite this and get him tried and ideally convicted of this and make it so he couldn't run again. And it feels like it was all just like slow played. And then Biden is like, that's his fatal mistake or something to that effect of one of those things like that of not going after Trump on that or January 6th or the documents or whatever. And then he's just going to end up losing, and he just wanted to run against Trump again or something like that. And it's really just a fatal mistake.
Yeah, and like the problem is too, right? I mean, it would have to be some weird convention thing that seems incredibly unlikely, because like the other half of this is that if Biden just like died tomorrow, then it would be the vice president, who is, maybe also not a gifted natural politician.
Yeah. Certainly not. Biden in his prime definitely would outperform Kamala. But although, Biden pre-2008 was not a great, I've talked about this, how he kind of failed his way into the vice presidency. Like he said something racist about Obama, and then Obama was like, well, this is exactly the message that I need is, I forgive you, America. But yeah, I have seen
get an old white man who was personally offensive to me. And that's like if this doesn't show how safe I am, I don't know what will.
Yeah. But I have seen polls that say Kamala would do better than Biden, because at least she's a relatively new face, but not a lot of confidence in that either.
If she could get a ceasefire, I could see then her like getting a bump in the polls, getting younger people a little more excited. She is younger. She's also a member of the Vanquished. She was so bad at the Democratic primary in 2020, she ended up having to drop out, and her spot was taken by Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg or whatever. So that's how badly she did in that primary. She didn't even stay in for the voting. And Andrew Yang too beat her.
Yeah. Well, that was my favorite thing about like the 2020 in the like beginning of 2020, the New York Times did this series of interviews that they actually shared, they made public, to decide who to endorse. Like the Bernie Sanders one was amazing. He stopped just short of being like, I fucking hate all of you people. Right. Like that was like kind of the gist of his interview. Right. Like it was like, it's like, yeah, everybody, reporters really respond to it if you like call them on their birthday. And thank you, Bernie. I don't like any of that bullshit. But
healthcare.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. Eventually,
he doesn't care what your birthday is.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like eventually, though, the decision they made was that they did this like weird joint endorsement of Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar, and clearly the intention was to do Harris and Klobuchar, but then Harris and Warren, right? But then because why would they Amy Klobuchar? That's such a weird choice, right? But then Harris, I think, had dropped out by then. But it ended up being like, look, I dislike Elizabeth Warren very much, but if I had been a Warren supporter, I can't imagine how insulted I would find that. You know? It's like, oh yeah, we're endorsing Warren or Klobuchar, whatever, same thing.
Right.
Both white women.
Yeah, my interpretation of that is like they were so. I mean, at that point, like there's kind of this new social democratic surge in America, and they kind of feel the need to at least throw that a bone. Obviously, they're not going to go with Bernie, but they have to give it some recognition with Warren. But they can't even take that on fully, so they have to pair it with just another moderate to make it more palatable. But yeah, just one of the funniest moments of that race.
Yeah, I remember.
I do think if. Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say I remember Michael Brooks suggesting that we should just endorse all the dudes in the race, right? Like the New York Times, premise. But you were saying, Freddie.
Oh yeah, I do think if Warren, this would be almost a different person, but if she had run against Biden in the primary, I feel like a lot of the liberals who are a little more left leaning liked her. I think she could have kind of united the party to get Biden out. She could have been maybe the Eugene McCarthy or RFK of the race.
Yeah,
fair enough. Well, thanks, guys. This was a ton of fun. We have a link in the description for where people can find the podcast. But which I assume is the one you want. I got it off of Freddie's Twitter. But in any case, is there anything else you'd like to plug before I let you go?
At Andersley here on Twitter, Dursley1 on Instagram. I'm also still on Poddamn America, so check that out wherever you get podcasts. And check us out on social media as well, at Vanquished Pod. We're on Twitter and Instagram.
Nice. Freddie?
Yeah. For me, at Ryan Freddy G on all the social media platforms. I have a stand-up show in Astoria, Queens, Acuity every Saturday at 11. Come see me tell jokes that aren't about loser presidential candidates.
Nice. All right, we're gonna bring the guys back on to do the Assange toast before we take off for to let you guys go and do the post game. This is here. You want to play the old Zizek clip where we're talking about him to give me a chance to pour a drink?
What Zizek clip are we playing?
Oh, do we not get that in the?
No, we don't have it.
No,
okay,
I don't remember seeing that. Did we ever do the battle of reading?
No, we'll save that for the post game. I think at this point,
Okay.
but it's too long for this right now. Here I've got it on. You know what? I've got the do this low tech for some of these essays. Got a screen share, so this works. So present, share screen. There we go.
You said something that I thought was very funny in a kind of grim way in an essay called "The Danger of Sharing a Cup of Coffee with Julian Assange." You were visiting Assange in prison. Guard brought you a cup of coffee, and you took off the lid. Yeah, you had a sip. You put it down like you do, and then maybe you put the lid back on. Like they made a big deal of it, and then the explanation afterwards was that because he was this dangerous prisoner, that you couldn't have hot coffee in between you, or your safety would be jeopardized.
It may throw it into my face. Yes, I will be frank. Usually, sometimes I wouldn't say lie, but creatively enhance reality. But you know what? Even me, an old cheater, that there I didn't lie. This is for me a simplified but perfect metaphor of where we are. Even the way we are controlled and so on, of course, everything is done for our health, safety, profit, and so on and so on.
So Julian Assange is finally going to get out of prison and be able to go home. I think he did have to, symbolically plead guilty to, one count of sharing national security information, but I think it had actually become an issue with the U.S. and Australia that this is like he was still going through this ordeal, which was certainly I wrote about it a couple years ago. I don't know. Time blurs together for Jacobin. I think we have that graphic. But in any case, this is So the headline there was that the attempt to extradite Julian Assange is a huge threat to press freedom, which was certainly true. But it's also just on a really fundamental human level. I mean, like, this has been like, how many years is it between the de facto house arrest at the Ecuadorian embassy and the actual arrest?
Was Bush still in?
Was that? It was Obama. I think it was 2011, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
So yeah, it's 13 years before the guy's since the guy's been allowed to, has been able to go outside. So, this is a good thing. So, yeah. Cheers.
Cheers.
All right. Thanks, guys. Really enjoyed the conversation. We got Ryan Zickgraf hanging out in the post game for patrons. We're going to go do that now. If you are a patron, you should have the link. If you are not, there's really no time like the present to get your life together and take care of that. So we will see you there in just about 2 minutes. Left is best.